Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about the famous Wars of the Roses. Now, these were a period of civil wars and unrest, and kings were changing left and right. This was going from 1455 to 1485, although some argue it's 1487, and I'll tell you why at the end. Now, it's between the houses of Lancaster and York, and there's the name is because of the supposed white rose of York and red rose of Lancaster. Although in reality, none of the houses used these symbols at the time, and this was all created by Shakespeare. And the name Wars of the Roses was only coined in the you think it's 19th century. So yeah, let's start. So first, the competing claims to the throne and the beginning of the Civil War. Well, both houses, Lancaster and York, had a claim to the English throne, and this was because they both were descendants of Edward III. The Lancastrians kind of took over the throne in 1399, Henry IV, who then had a son, Henry V, who took over the throne in 1413. No, well, he took over the throne and ended up dying in 1413 is the Battle of Agincourt. Anyway, who ended up dying in 1422, relatively young. Now, he had a son a few months earlier, Henry, who would now be a king, Henry VI. He was just a minor. He was just 9 months old. So obviously, a council had to be set up to rule England until Henry reached a legal age. Well, like Richard II, Henry VI had another family who wanted power because the nobles in England at the time were greedy for power. Well, there were magnates with private armies essentially ruling the countryside instead of the king. And then there was the matter of Margaret of Anjou, who dominated Henry because he was simple-minded, had spells of madness, and he wasn't a particularly strong king like, I don't know, Edward III or Henry V had been. Well, she even let the English position in France kind of weaken and deteriorate because, she was French. She was her family was French, Margaret of Anjou, French. Anyway, between 1450 and 1460, Richard of York, he was a duke. He became the head of the Baronial League, most famous member of which was the Earl of Warwick. He comes into play later on. Well, in 1453, Henry became mad. He lost his mind and he just couldn't govern. So, York, Duke of York, he became protector of the realm. By the way, Wars of Roses, I forgot to mention, served as the inspiration for the famous TV show Game of Thrones. Lancaster, Lannister, York, Stark, and Richard of York becoming protector of the realm is the same thing as, Ned Stark becoming Hand of the King. Anyway, a few years later, in 1455, Henry fully recovered, but was still under the influence of Margaret of Anjou. Margaret of Anjou, by the way, Cersei Lannister is based on Margaret of Anjou. Well, whatever. She established her own and her party's authority, and York was, if he wanted to stay in power, he had to take up arms, which he did. So then came the Battle of St. Albans, St. Albans, in May 22nd, 1455, which is argued to be the first battle of the Wars of the Roses. Well, it was a Yorkist victory, and a truce of 4 years ensued. Now, 4 years, but Henry was still on the throne. The battle was a Yorkist victory, but Henry VI was still king. 4 years later, York rebelled. He won in Blairheath on September 23rd, but lost at Ludford Bridge on October 12th, and had to flee to Ireland. The Lancastrians, in a parliament at Coventry in November 1459, got a judicial condemnation and managed to be able to execute a lot of their opponents. Well, also, this period of lawlessness and noble corruption and just killing each other, yeah, some of the ideas came from the Italian Renaissance, but well, the lawless habits of the nobles in the Hundred Years' War was kind of the big thing that influenced this this period of civil unrest. And there's an argument that the English Civil War was the first civil war, not the Wars of the Roses or even the civil wars that came before, because England wasn't fully a nation up until the English Civil War. Like, yeah, England wasn't fully a nation by this point, so you can't really say it was a civil war. But for now, let's just call it a civil war. Anyway, Warwick regrouped Yorkist forces in France and came to England in June 1460. And he actually managed to defeat the Lancastrians in at Northampton on July 10th. Well, York, instead of claiming the throne and saying, I want to be on there, he settled for, okay, once Henry VI dies, I'll take the throne. Now, this is all good and all, right? Win-win. Henry stays on the throne until his death, although you could argue that he was more in danger because his enemies could, supporters of York would kill him, but whatever. And Duke of York, he kind of got what he wanted. He would be king. But the son of the king was disinherited. Prince Edward, he was no longer the heir to the throne. And, Margaret, she didn't like that. And she wanted her son to be king after her husband. So she continued to oppose York. Now, there was a battle at Wakefield in December of that year, which, and I'm taking this from a YouTube channel, which I forget the name, which kind of stopped York's aims because, he was killed in the battle, so he couldn't maybe pursue power any further. Anyway, Warwick he continued fighting, but was defeated at the Second Battle of St. Albans on February 17th, 1461. Well, York's son Edward, he also defeated the Lancastrians at Mortimer's Cross on February 2nd. A lot of people named Edward at that time. So they have this Edward, the son of York, and then Edward, the son of Henry. No, not Henry, what am I saying? Yeah, Henry. Yeah, son Henry. Yeah, so have Edward, the son of York, Edward, the son of Henry, then Edward the Third, who was the king way before. And then we have Henry V. So there's a lot of Edwards in this period. Well, Edward, the son of York, he defeated the Lancastrians at Mortimer's Cross on February 2nd, a few days before Warwick was defeated. So he traveled to London and arrived on February 26th. And he actually got there before Margaret did. Well, he was proclaimed King Edward on March 4th. He was now Edward IV. But at the same time, Henry VI was king, so there's a bit of who's king at the point. I think one point's Henry VI, then Edward, then Henry, then Edward. It's a bit confusing, but okay, I mean, the whole period is confusing. The Wars of the Roses, it's a really confusing time. Well, Margaret was forced to go to Towton, and there was the bloodiest battle of the war and one of the bloodiest battles of English history. And so Henry, Margaret, and their son were forced to flee to Scotland, and there they remained for a short period. And that ends the first section of the war. There's a few sections. There weren't periods of constant fighting. It was just a bunch of periods of unrest, but it wasn't a whole period of fighting. It wasn't one constant war. That's why it's not called War of the Roses. It's Wars of the Roses. It's plural. Well, the next part is the ascendancy of Warwick. Well, next round, that's my cat. You can probably see her in the corner. The next round of unrest rose because disputes with the Yorkists. Warwick was now so close of Yorkist success, so he expected to be heavily rewarded. He was kind of the ruler of the kingdom until 1464, and he managed to put down Lancastrians who wanted to keep the war going in the north and in Wales. And he had the help of Margaret and the French, so he wanted to put down like that. And he actually did. He was quite successful in calming stuff down because he wanted to remain in power. I mean, yeah, Edward was king, but Warwick was high in favor, so yeah. Then came the Battle of Hexham in May 1464, after which there was a whole lot of executions, which ended up killing the majority of the Lancastrians. Now, after this, this left the main Lancastrian claimant to the throne being Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor doesn't come into play until much later, but is he even alive at this point? Yeah, he's alive. But he is. He is alive, but he is now the main Lancastrian claimant to the throne. Although there's still some, but Henry's the main one. Well, a year after this happened, so in 1465, Henry VI was captured and was sent to the Tower of London. Now, there's a reason I say Henry VI, and it's because he is still king technically. He hasn't been dethroned, so he's still king, but Edward is king. Well, Warwick, he tried to improve the justice system and make the crown solvent, but Warwick and Edward ended up getting caught between Louis XI's diplomacy and essentially became pawns for the French. Well, at one point Edward became tired of Warwick and started pushing him away. Not actually sending him away, but starting to not consult him on some matters and just ignore him a bit. Anyway, he also married Elizabeth Woodville, Edward the Fourth. He married Elizabeth Woodville in 1464. 1464, a lot of things happened that year. Well, the Woodvilles had a lot of ties with the Lancasters. Now, Edward the Fourth was the Yorkist. And by no means this is them uniting the Yorkists and the Lancasters. The Woodvilles had relations with the Lancasters, but not they weren't part of the Lancaster family. Well, her influence over the king started increasing, so Warwick's started decreasing. It went down. So, things didn't really help when in 1467, Edward actually removed the Lord Chancellor at the time, who was in fact Warwick's brother. This really upset Warwick, so he said, okay, you're going to treat me like that, I'm going to create opposition and you're going to go down, because I got you to where you are. You better, I thought you would keep me in mind, that you would reward me, but turns out you're shunning me. So, you're going to pay for this. And he did. Well, he was behind the rising of Robin of Raddisdale in April 1469, and ended up raising a fort in Calais, France. Yep. And he married his daughter to Edward's brother without any permission, which at the time, if you want to marry any noble, there was a marriage between any noble, especially the king's brother and, Warwick's daughter. There needed to be king's permission, but of course, Warwick is dude, you're ignoring me, so I'm going to just marry my daughter off to your brother, and you can kind of suck it, you know? Well, he landed in Kent and even defeated the royal forces in July at Edgecote. Yes, Edgecote. Anyway, this caused Edward to become Warwick's prisoner. Edward was under the control of Warwick now. And Warwick is like, haha, sucker, you're under my control. Who's in power now? Who's laughing now? That's what you get for shunning me. But the Queen's father, brother, and friends were executed, the Woodvilles, because Warwick obviously disliked them. But he couldn't bask in his glory for too long, because by March 1470, so really not long after that, Edward had regained control. Warwick was forced to flee to France and even allied with Louis XI, and ended up returning to England in September of that year. Edward was kind of deposed, and Henry VI was restored. And when I say deposed, he was no longer the main king. They were both kings, kind of. So, yeah, by this point, the actual king was now Henry VI. But Edward IV was still king. It's confusing, I know. Well, Warwick ended up being high in favor with Henry. Warwick, he just switched loyalties whenever he could. He says I can be high in favor with the king. I can have a lot of power. Let me just. And he did. Well, he became Henry's lieutenant for 6 months. And meanwhile, Edward was forced to flee to the Netherlands. And then the last part, that ends the second section of the Wars of the Roses. And here comes the last section, and this is called the Triumph of Edward IV. Well, Warwick at this point, he was really unpopular. The Yorkists disliked him because, he had betrayed Edward. And the Lancastrians, they distrusted him because of his previous allegiance to Edward. So, he had a lot of opposition from both families, so he wasn't in a really strong position. However, Edward the Fourth, he had quite a significant amount of opposition. So he said, "Hey, I'm gonna just return to England and try to take power again." He did in March 1471 at Ravenspur, and he actually had money from Burgundy. Well, on April 14th, in the Battle of Barnet, Edward ended up defeating Warwick. Who, again, his ambitions were kind of stopped because, he was killed, so he couldn't really pursue power any further, very much like York. So, kind of symmetric, so, two parallels, I just like that. Well, Margaret and her son, they landed at Weymouth and tried to reach Wales. But Edward got to her first and ended up capturing her at the Battle of Tewkesbury on May 4th of 1471. And, her son was killed. Prince Edward was killed by King Edward. And also Henry VI died in the Tower of London. He was murdered, but he died. But yeah, he was murdered, just that. Margaret was eventually released from custody when Louis XI, he paid for her ransom. And in 1475, this was when that happened. And Edward, he was kind of stable on the throne. This was 1475, and he remained on the throne until 1483, when he died. So he couldn't do much about that. And his son, Edward V, came to the throne. Problem is, Edward was young. He was just a child. I don't know how old he was. And he had a few brothers, but another one was Richard of York. Not the same Richard, because that guy was dead. But of course, Edward decided to honor Richard of York by naming his son Richard, who was now also Duke of York. Anyway, they were just kids, so their uncle Richard, he became regent, and he was supposed to aid the king until he was of age and he could rule by himself. And well, Richard thought, great idea. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna because you're just a child and your brother is also just a child. I'm gonna put you in Tower of London. This is not imprisonment. This is like for safety. There's nothing safer than the Tower of London. Don't worry, guys. I'm gonna rule on your behalf, but you're still king. And then the princess became the princess in the tower. They were in the Tower of London. A while later, they just disappeared. Richard had them killed. And well, Richard was now Richard III. He ruled from 1483 to 1485 until this guy came from Brittany with a lot of supporters from the French and from Lancasters and, well, yeah, even some Yorkists. And he actually killed Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field on the 22nd of August, 1485. This guy, Henry Tudor. He was crowned king a few days later, I forgot the date, and ended up marrying Edward IV's sister, Elizabeth of York, in 1486, January 1486. And this was effectively when the houses of York and Lancaster were united, and when the Roses were united and forming the Tudor Rose, the famous yellow and white roses. And yeah, this was 1480. Like the Battle of Bosworth was in 1485, but because I mentioned right at the beginning that some argue that the Wars of the Roses ended in 1487. This is because there was this pretender to the throne that arose in 1487 called Lambert Simnel. He pretended to be the Earl of Warwick. He pretended to be Richard of York, one of the princes in the Tower, but then changed to the Earl of Warwick, which was kind of stupid because the Earl of Warwick was under Henry's custody. I know, Henry literally paraded the Earl of Warwick around London to show, hey, look, that guy, who's saying he's the Earl of Warwick, he's not, it's this guy. Well, there was a whole Battle of Stoke, in 1487, in which Earl Henry won, and he really established his power, and that is the end of the Wars of the Roses. That's it. And then came the Tudor dynasty, and then the Stuarts, and then the Hanoverians, and then Windsor, I think. Yeah, and the Windsor. So that is the Wars of the Roses. It's really confusing, one of the most confusing periods in English history, but it's really, really interesting. I love this period because it's not really at school, you don't really learn it, but in the betrayal, the changing of power, it's interesting enough. They based a whole TV show on it, like with different characters, and it's Game of Thrones. But it's one of the most interesting periods in history, and I love it, and that's why I made a video on it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.